It had been 4 quiet months since the chaos. Jack's life, at least on the surface, had returned to normal. The door that Karen's make-believe HOA police once kicked in had been replaced with a reinforced steel slab that looked like wood. His porch lights flicked on a bit faster now, and he'd added cameras, some visible, others not. Still, the neighborhood had settled. Karen had vanished from public life, and the HOA barely mentioned her name anymore. Most evenings, Jack sat on his porch sipping black coffee as the sun dipped behind the line of pines at the edge of his property. The neighborhood kids no longer sped past his driveway, and adults offered him friendly but cautious waves. He returned the gestures with a calm nod, always polite, always watching. But lately, something felt off. It started with the same silver sedan parked 3 houses down. Not unusual by itself, except it had no bumper sticker, no sunshade, no signs of life inside. Just a shadowy figure behind tinted glass who never stepped out. It came and went at different hours, sometimes morning, sometimes 2 a.m. Then came the subtle buzzing overhead, too high-pitched for mosquitoes, too irregular for birds. Jack didn't panic. He never panicked. But his instincts, finely honed through years of classified work, sharpened with every passing day. He adjusted one of his cameras to catch the license plate of the silver sedan. The next morning, a black SUV took its place. No plates. That evening, while walking his property line, Jack found fresh footprints in the soil by the fence. They didn't belong to him. He stood still for a moment, the wind whispering through the trees. Whoever was watching him wasn't careless, but they weren't as careful as they thought. Back inside, he dimmed the lights, opened his laptop, and brought up the security feeds. He watched them for hours. At 3:07 a.m., a shape flitted across one camera. Drone. It hovered for 5 seconds before vanishing behind the treetops. "This isn't Karen," Jack murmured, his voice barely above a breath. Karen was a busybody, a control freak on a power trip. But this was surgical, quiet, deliberate, and coordinated. The next morning, Jack took a walk around the block. He waved to neighbors, paused to check his mailbox, and even made small talk with Mrs. Langley about her tulips. All the while, he felt the weight of eyes pressing against the back of his neck. Someone was tracking his movements, and they were good. By noon, he was back inside, pouring himself a glass of water. He set it down, untouched. Whoever they weren't amateurs. That made them dangerous. But Jack had a rule: never strike first unless you had to. So he waited, observed, cataloged. One camera recorded a man in a ball cap walking a dog past the house 3 times in the same hour. Another caught the drone again, this time pausing, near the attic vent, as if scanning. Jack clicked through the footage in silence, then leaned back in his chair. His face unreadable, his pulse steady. "You're not the first," he whispered, "and you won't be the last." He stood, drew the blinds, and picked up a burner phone from his locked drawer. "Yeah," he said after one ring. "It's starting again." And just like that, the calm he'd rebuilt was gone. The shadows had returned, and this time, they weren't here for the HOA. They were here for something far more dangerous. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Jack hadn't thought about Karen in weeks until her name appeared, bold and unmistakable, in the subject line of an HOA email. Petition to reinstate Karen Wexley. Community Voices Matter. He read it twice, then a third time, slower. Karen? After everything? The message was short, vague, and strangely diplomatic. It didn't mention the door-kicking fiasco or the federal investigation that followed. Instead, it focused on her deep, commitment to neighborhood safety, and her unfortunate removal under misunderstood circumstances. It claimed she'd taken time to reflect and was ready to re-engage constructively. Jack leaned back in his chair, the screen casting a soft glow across his face. He didn't feel anger, more like a low, calculated alertness. He wasn't one to believe in coincidences. And this smelled off. Not 2 days after surveillance activity picked up around his house. Now this? Karen, of all people? He opened a browser on a secure laptop, one he only used for certain searches, and typed in her full name. Most of the usual noise came up: HOA photos, archived Facebook posts, one satirical Reddit thread mocking her citizen arrest fantasies. But on page 3 of the results, something caught his eye. A LinkedIn profile, recently updated. Karen Wexley, Community Liaison Consultant at Northbridge Solutions. Jack clicked. Northbridge. He recognized the name instantly. A private security firm that made the news a few years back for surveillance consulting on behalf of certain local governments. The kind of company that advertised discretion and specialized in borderless accountability. Former military, ex-cops, and freelancers with murky pasts. The kind of people who used drones and ghost cars. The kind of people who didn't knock. Jack's brow tightened. He scrolled through the sparse profile. Most of it read like fluff. Advocate for neighborhood integrity. Licensed community oversight trainer. But the employment dates matched up. Karen had gone radio silent right after the FBI sweep. And just a few months later, she re-emerged with a shiny new role in a questionable outfit. He tapped the desk thoughtfully. This wasn't about the HOA anymore. Jack picked up his secure phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "You still breathing, Jack?" "Still quiet on the surface," Jack replied. "But there's noise underneath. You finally calling in that favor? I need a background scrape. Fast. Someone from Northbridge, Karen Wexley, cross-check her employer with vehicle activity in my county." There was a pause on the line, then a slow exhale. Didn't expect her name again. Neither did I. You think she's behind the shadows you mentioned? I don't think she's the brains, Jack muttered. But she's part of the machine. He hung up and stood by the window. The silver sedan was back, parked farther down this time, half concealed by a neighbor's hedge. Too far for a plate, but close enough to remind him someone was watching, always watching. Jack watched right back. If Karen was climbing back into the HOA through the front door, it meant whoever she was working with wanted access from the inside, not just his neighborhood, his house, his tech, his history. They were either too bold or too desperate. Jack pulled the curtain closed and opened a hidden drawer in his office cabinet. Inside sat a small metal case, fingerprint locked. He hadn't touched it in over a year, until now. As he scanned, his thumb to unlock it, he whispered to himself. If Karen wants round 2, she better be ready for what's coming. Because this time, Jack wasn't going to wait for them to kick in the door. Jack was raking leaves when he saw the man, mid-40s, tall, lean build, buzz cut under a black cap that didn't quite match the rest of his outfit. No neighborhood badge, no HOA polo, just tactical boots, tan slacks, and a nondescript black jacket. He was standing on the sidewalk staring too long at Jack's house like he was reading blueprints in his head. Jack didn't let on. He kept raking. Slow, rhythmic, calm. The man stepped onto the lawn. "Hey there, sir. You Jack?" Jack paused mid-rake, wiped his forehead with the back of his glove, and gave the man a neutral smile. "That's me. Can I help you?" The stranger reached into his pocket and flashed a cheap-looking laminated ID card, too fast for Jack to see the details. "Name's Mason. I'm with a private security firm doing some community outreach. You know, checking on things." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Outreach? Yeah. Just a courtesy thing. We've had reports of recent activity. Some suspicious behavior around this area. Thought I'd stop by, ask if you've noticed anything." Jack's instincts were already flaring. He leaned casually on the rake. "Suspicious behavior? Like what? Kids ding-dong ditching again? Happens every Halloween." Mason gave a forced chuckle. "Not exactly, just patterns. Late-night traffic, unusual signals." That was no HOA language. Jack nodded slowly. "I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary, but I appreciate you checking in." Mason's eyes scanned the property, lingering, on the back of the house, where Jack knew the signal relays were buried beneath faux garden beds. "You've got quite the setup here. Solar, reinforced siding, UX military." Jack smiled. "I like my peace and quiet." A long pause stretched between them. Mason finally nodded. "Well, if you do see anything, give us a call." He handed over a business card. Jack took it, but already knew it wouldn't lead anywhere official. There was no logo, just a number and a name. Mason Carter, Field Liaison. "I'll do that," Jack said flatly. He didn't move until Mason walked back down the sidewalk, stepped into a gray SUV parked a few houses away, and drove off. Jack stood there another full minute before heading inside. He dropped the card on the table and pulled up the live feed from his home surveillance system. 2 cameras had caught Mason casing the house from multiple angles, before and after the car approach. The man had even paused at the utility pole behind Jack's lot, pretending to tie his shoe while clearly scanning for motion sensors. Jack zoomed in on Mason's wrist. There, barely visible under his sleeve, was a black watch with a blinking green light, not civilian issue. Later that night, just past 1 a.m., Jack's security monitor lit up with a silent alert: fence line breach, Zone 4. He tapped into the infrared feed. A figure, smaller than Mason but moving with similar caution, crept along the side of the yard. They paused by the shed, looked up toward the motion light, but it didn't turn on. Jack had disabled the obvious triggers months ago. What this intruder didn't know was that the area was rigged with passive seismic sensors and a directional audio recorder. He watched as the figure reached into their jacket and produced a small tool, maybe a lockpick, maybe something worse. They approached the fence panel near the utility corner, where Karen had once insisted Jack trim his vines better. Jack stood silently in the dark, already dressed in black, blending into the room's shadows. He didn't call the police. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He reached for the small remote on his desk and tapped a single button. Outside, the perimeter lights blinked once, then went dead. The yard flooded with near-total darkness, except for a soft red strobe that pulsed under the soil. The intruder froze, likely unsure if it was a tripwire or just a warning. It was both. Jack picked up his walkie and whispered, "Zone 4 active. I'm going out." He pulled open the side door and stepped out into the night, silent as the shadows now watching him. This wasn't the HOA anymore. This was something else. And Jack was ready. The deeper Jack dug, the more the pieces stopped making sense. And then suddenly, they did. It started with a name that showed up on a security clearance database he still had access to, barely. Just a ping. C.R. Vaughn. It wouldn't have meant anything to a civilian, but Jack knew better. Vaughn had been a dark ops handler back in the early 2000s, off the books, highly intelligent, utterly untrustworthy, and very, very missing, but Vaughn wasn't missing anymore. According to a trace Jack ran through a backdoor channel, someone using Vaughn's credentials had rented an office space just 2 towns over, under the name Orion Systems Consulting. Generic. Quiet. Off the radar. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the blinking dot on his screen. That's when he realized Karen's antics weren't just the result of suburban boredom or a control complex. They were part of something larger, something orchestrated. He opened archived surveillance footage from 6 months ago, just after the FBI had wrapped their investigation. There, clear as day, was Karen meeting a man behind the HOA clubhouse. Nighttime, grainy resolution, but his profile matched the old photo from Vaughn's last known file. It wasn't a social visit. Karen had looked nervous, even deferential. She handed him something, a flash drive, maybe a folder. In return, he gave her a small black envelope. Leverage. Jack's fingers hovered over his keyboard. He checked his encrypted logs and found a digital handshake. Someone had been trying to ping his signal repeaters, not to access government data, but to map his network, surveillance, passive data scraping. That's what this was about. They didn't want to expose him. They wanted to use him. And Karen? She was the perfect pawn, angry, discredited, and with just enough bitterness left in her to cooperate. Vaughn had found a way back into the game through a woman who'd already lost everything. Jack sat in silence, staring at the grainy image. Of the two meeting. Why come back now? He muttered under his breath. What are you really after? He knew his house had been part of a secure relay system, but there was more beneath the property, much more, and the FBI hadn't declassified any of that. They had lied, even to him. Jack's phone vibrated. A message from an old contact in Virginia read only, "He's not working alone." Jack's chest tightened slightly. His instincts, always sharp, were now screaming. This wasn't just surveillance. It was preparation. Vaughn wanted something. Something big. Something that had been buried and locked down when Jack signed on years ago. Karen might have thought she was helping uncover some rogue government conspiracy, but she had no idea she was dealing with a man who made conspiracy his currency. Jack stood up and walked toward the kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street beyond. Somewhere out there, Karen was still in play. Whether she was hiding or being hidden, he didn't know. But what he did know was that this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, Jack wasn't going to wait for the storm to hit. Jack knew when to call in backup, and more importantly, how to do it without raising alarms. It was late evening when he sent a secured, triple-encrypted message to a contact at the bureau. Just 3 words. Ready for bait. The reply came 2 hours later, through an innocuous file disguised as a grocery receipt. Inside it, the Bureau's digital forensics team acknowledged the green light. Operation parameters were tight. Full discretion, non-lethal engagement, eyes everywhere, but no overt presence. This wasn't a raid, it was a trap. Jack had done his part. For the past week, he'd staged a slow decline in security discipline. First, he let his back gate hang slightly open. Then, he turned off motion lights in key areas. His cameras glitched. Pixelated freezes, distorted timestamps, dead angles. Of course, all of it was calculated. Behind every blind spot was another hidden lens. Every offline node rerouted through a black channel relay the FBI had installed in a nearby power substation. It had to feel real, and Jack sold it. He walked the yard with slumped shoulders, his body language casual, even tired. He left. Out tools, wires, and even an open laptop by the shed one afternoon. His message was clear. He'd gotten complacent, vulnerable. The bait was in the water. Across the neighborhood, things changed. Not outwardly, no black SUVs, no agents in suits, but the subtle details shifted. That sweet older couple who always walked their golden retriever. The man suddenly wore running shoes instead of loafers, his gait tighter, his glances sharper. A gardener working on a nearby home parked his truck closer than usual, always in sight of Jack's driveway. Jack knew them all. They weren't neighbors, they were watchers. The FBI had nested agents into the neighborhood like chess pieces. No uniforms, no badges. Just plain folks doing ordinary things, while armed with silent comms and heat-scanning optics. And Karen? Still missing. But her ghost lingered. The HOA email chain was unusually silent. Her name had vanished. It was like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Jack installed one final component, a decoy uplink inside his shed. It looked identical to a high-value encrypted transmitter, but in reality, it was a monitored honeypot, custom designed to ping the bureau the moment someone touched it. He even left a back panel slightly loose, an obvious point of entry. Then, he waited. Each night stretched longer than the last. Jack slept lightly, if at all, always half-dressed and armed, his concealed monitor feeds running silently by his bedside. His finger hovered near the panic button more than once. On the fourth night, it happened. A soft click on the side gate. A shape, no, two, slid through the shadows like oil, dressed in black, full face coverings. One carried what looked like a signal disruptor, the other a crowbar. They moved with practiced coordination, but they weren't good enough. They didn't see the micro-drone silently rising from under Jack's porch light. They didn't notice the thermal scope watching from the neighbor's attic. And they didn't hear the faint chirp that triggered as soon as the shed's decoy was opened. Jack sat in his living room, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the monitor. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then a voice crackled over the radio in his wall, embedded there years ago for this exact kind of moment. Target breach confirmed. Perimeter locked. Go. The street erupted in motion, but soundlessly. Tactical agents moved like ghosts, boxing in the intruders with speed and precision. It was over in 28 seconds. By the time Jack stepped outside, robe tied, coffee, mug in hand, it was all contained. The two men were zip-tied on the sidewalk, blinking against the sudden flood of porch lights. One of them, the taller one, had a scar running across his cheek. Jack knew that scar. It belonged to a man who had vanished from a CIA black site years ago. He sipped his coffee, then nodded toward the lead agent. "Looks like your bait worked," the agent said. Jack didn't smile. He just looked past them, toward the woods beyond the fence. "I don't think this is over," he said quietly. "Not yet." It was a little past 2 a.m. when the quiet broke. The night had been unusually still. No wind, no insects, no rustling trees. Just the kind of silence that makes a man like Jack sit up in bed, not from noise, but from instinct. His eyes opened seconds before the first tripwire broke. Snap, beep, silence. Jack slid out of bed, barefoot, heartbeat steady. The silent alarm pulsed twice on his watch. Zone 3 breach, west fence line. They were here. From a distance, the rogue group moved like shadows, fast, tight formation, dressed in matte black, night vision goggles strapped over masked faces. 4 men, 1 woman, armed, trained, and dangerously confident. But Jack had been expecting them. Every inch of his property had been retrofitted after the last fiasco. The house wasn't just a home now. It was a trap. As the first figure stepped through the fence, a low thunk sounded beneath the grass. Pressure plate triggered. Nothing lethal, just a blinding strobe flood, followed by a high-frequency screech that instantly wrecked their comms. They froze. That was their first mistake. The second was pushing forward. They split. 2 went for the shed, 2 toward the back patio, and the 5th moved up the side path toward the main entrance, just as planned. Jack watched from a hidden panel behind, a false wall in the hallway. His house dimmed automatically, creating perfect camera contrast. Every move the intruders made was tracked, triangulated, and updated in real time. And then came the final step. Now. His voice didn't echo. It didn't need to. From the woods, the FBI's embedded field team burst forward in silence. No sirens, no shouting. Dart guns first, then suppressors. They weren't here to kill, just to end it clean. 2 of the rogue operatives didn't even see what hit them. One tried to flee and ran headfirst into a retractable steel net Jack had installed by the gate. The fourth reached for a gun and took a precise, non-lethal shot to the thigh that dropped him instantly. Only one made it inside. And that's where the twist hit. Jack entered the kitchen with his hands raised, calm, unarmed. Across from him, the fifth intruder stood by the fridge, holding a gun, but shaking. It was Karen. Her hair was chopped short, dyed dark. Her face, thinner, aged. But Jack recognized those eyes, the same desperate defiance, the same self-righteous fire. Except now, it had gone cold. "What are you doing, Karen?" Jack asked, keeping his voice even. She laughed, but it cracked halfway. "Oh, they lied to me," she muttered. "Said you were a threat. Said the tech here was dangerous." "It's not," Jack said simply. "But you are." She raised the gun an inch, just enough to feel in control. "You don't get it. They said you'd started hiding more. Something about a second relay under the foundation, that you had access." I didn't want to believe it, but Jack cut her off. "They used you, Karen." Again. Her hand trembled. Behind her, a red dot landed on the wall. She never even saw the dart coming. Karen crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Jack exhaled and lowered his hands. "You always did love drama," he murmured to no one in particular. By dawn, all 5 intruders were gone, quietly loaded into unmarked vans. The property reset itself, cameras rebooted, doors realigned. Lights flicked back on, but Jack didn't sleep. He stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the rising sun with a tight jaw and a heavy chest. If they'd sent Karen again, who would come next? And what did they really think he was guarding? Beneath his home? It didn't take long for the truth to surface. Though she hadn't stepped foot on Jack's property that night, Karen's fingerprints were all over the operation, just not in the way most expected. She hadn't pulled the trigger. She hadn't climbed fences or hacked through Jack's encrypted systems. But she'd done something far more dangerous. She funded it. The FBI traced a shell company's wire transfers to a surveillance group operating out of a nondescript building in Nevada. The money was clean on the surface. Donations for community security improvements from a dormant HOA account. But when the forensic accountants dug deeper, they found the roots. Karen's name, buried beneath layers of transactions. A digital trail of revenge disguised as civic duty. Jack received the call 3 days after the failed break-in. He was trimming hedges, trying to reclaim some normalcy, when the special agent's voice cut through the hum of his trimmer. They picked her up in Arizona. She was trying to cross into Mexico. Jack stood still for a moment, one gloved hand, gripping the hedge clippers tightly. "Did she resist?" "No," the agent replied. "She just said, I knew they'd send someone eventually." The news exploded across the neighborhood like wildfire. The HOA board descended into chaos. Meetings were abruptly canceled. Lawsuits loomed. Some members tried to distance themselves from Karen, swearing they had no idea about the funds. Others stepped down quietly, hoping to avoid the fallout. The words embezzlement, conspiracy, and aiding a federal crime started swirling in whispers and gossip threads. For the first time, Jack wasn't just a mystery in the cul-de-sac. He became something else entirely. A symbol. He didn't ask for it. In fact, he hated it. Jack had always been a man of shadows, someone who operated behind the curtain, trusted because he remained unseen. But now, parents gave him respectful nods at the mailbox. Elderly neighbors stopped to thank him for keeping the community safe. Even the new guy at Lot 23 handed him a six-pack with a sheepish grin and said, "Didn't realize we were living next to a legend." Jack didn't laugh. He just took the beer and gave a quiet thanks. Behind closed doors, though, he thought about Karen. How her obsession hadn't been about power, but fear. Fear of what she didn't understand. Fear that Jack, by simply existing beyond her control, posed a threat. And that fear had twisted her into someone capable of destroying everything, including herself. One evening, Jack stood in front of his porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The breeze rustled the leaves gently, and for a moment, it felt like the neighborhood had exhaled. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for now, the chaos had paused. And in the quiet, Jack could finally breathe again. Even if he knew peace around him never lasted long, the neighborhood never quite felt the same again. For a while it was quiet, almost too quiet. No HOA. Patrols roaming the streets, no flyers about fence color violations, no suspicious glances from across the yard. Karen's shadow had lifted, but it left something behind, a kind of uneasy stillness, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen again, but no one dared speak it aloud. Jack didn't celebrate the peace. He reinforced it. He upgraded every sensor, swapped out cameras for newer, smarter models, thermal, motion-activated aerial sweep capability, the kind of stuff that wouldn't be out of place in a military outpost. Even the mailbox had a discreet scan system. To most, his home looked like any other ranch-style house with freshly painted trim. But underneath, it was a digital fortress. The HOA never bothered him again, not after the FBI press conference, not after the lawsuits, and certainly not after Karen's quiet sentencing. They sent him a polite letter about future transparency, invited him to rejoin community events, even offered to name him as a special advisor. Jack never responded. He kept to himself, mostly, mowed the lawn on Tuesdays, waved at neighbors from a distance, walked his dog, a retired K9 unit named Ghost, around the block twice a day like clockwork. Most people gave him a respectful berth, and he was fine with that. Trust had become currency, and no one in that cul-de-sac had enough left in the bank to earn his. Then came the new guy. It was mid-autumn when the moving truck pulled in across the street. Jack noticed immediately, not because of the truck, but because of the man who stepped out of it. He moved with purpose, no wasted motion. Even in jeans and a hoodie, the posture was unmistakable, spine straight, eyes scanning. Former military, maybe law enforcement. Possibly both. Jack didn't stare, but he didn't look away either. They met eyes briefly across the street. No smile, just a nod. The man nodded back. That night, Jack sat in his office, the glow of monitors reflecting off his glasses. He pulled up the external camera feed, zooming in on the new neighbor's house. Nothing unusual. Yet the man hadn't opened blinds. He'd unpacked with efficiency. No kids, no partner. Just a single duffel bag, a locked gun case, and a steel briefcase that he carried in himself. Jack noticed the model, military-grade, double-clasped, biometric seal. Not standard issue for someone just looking to escape city life. He leaned back in his chair. Interesting, he muttered. Ghost let out a soft whine from the rug, sensing Jack's shift in energy. Yeah, Jack said softly, scratching behind the dog's ear. I know. The next morning, as Jack watered his front hedges, the new neighbor emerged. They exchanged another nod. Name's Cole, the man said simply, walking to his mailbox. No handshake, just that same steady gaze. Jack. Cole looked around, eyes settling on the reinforced base of Jack's porch camera. Heard this place had history. Jack chuckled once, low and dry. You could say that, Cole offered. A faint smile. Not friendly, but knowing. Like two people who had read the same classified file and knew better than to ask follow-up questions. They didn't speak again that day, or the day after. But something unspoken passed between them. A mutual understanding. Whatever this neighborhood had been, it still was. A quiet battlefield of secrets and quiet players. Life moved forward, but not blindly. Jack knew better. Peace in his world was rarely permanent, just the breath you took between storms. And across the street, a man with a military spine and a cryptic smile had just taken up residence. Jack watered the last of the hedges, looked toward the sky, and went back inside, locking the door behind him with a soft, mechanical click. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.